Welcome, everyone. We've got a guest today, Erin Bauer from ASQE. Hi, Erin. Can you
Hi, Brian.
introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on your work experience and what led you to ASQE? And then I'll lead into our discussion later on sustainability and ESG and how your group's doing some good work there.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. And hello, everyone. So, as Brian mentioned, my name is Erin Bauer. I'm the product development manager for ASQ Excellence, or ASQE for short. We are the sister association to ASQ, and to kind of give a little bit more context about how the two organizations work together, ASQ has obviously been around for 75 plus years. It was founded in 1946, and for decades, it was the backbone of the equality movement in the United States as well as internationally. And in 2020 is when ASQE was formed. And the reason for that is that ASQ has been a 501c3. It's been a professional association for many years, and that really focuses on the growth of the individual. So when you think about a quality engineer or someone in the assessment area or an auditor, or things like that, ASQ is really designed to help with their education and the advancement of the professional. And within those years, ASQ had organizational members. There were actually 25 of the original founding organizational members, which included companies like General Motors and Abbott Laboratories. But in 2020, I was actually part of the team that started ASQE as a trade association. So we are a 501c6. And what our mission is to empower the organizations that we serve to build their quality performance. So it's really more about the organizational structure, the culture, and how they can motivate their employees holistically as an organization to advance forward. So if you've been to any of our types of learnings, our thought leaderships events that we host, we talk about that symbiotic relationship between ASQ and ASQE. So while ASQ offers individual memberships, which Brian, you're a member of ASQ, we offer the organizational membership side where an organization is actually the member and then their employees enjoy the benefits very similar to ASQ's benefits. There's a lot of crossover within the deliverables that are provided, but there are some main differences that ASQE offers, and we'll get into that later in the podcast.
Yeah, I was trying to remember my first interaction with ASQ. I took statistics in college, but I went into quality management for a master's program, and I know we did a tour of like a Motorola site. And this is probably mid 1990s or something, and that was something that they'd sponsored. The local chapter of ASQ had sponsored, and then I remember I had like a student membership for a little bit, and then when I started working professionally, then in the quality department, they said you should get a membership, and I think some people at Rockwell Collins were part of the local chapter members there. So then, yeah, I've just been involved with the group and then going through some of the certifications. I did CQE early on and then Six Sigma Black Belt. So yeah, it's been a really good group to work with.
Yeah, and what you just described is a very common trajectory that a lot of the members take, right? They get involved early on. That's one of the bright spots of ASQ is the technical and the geographic communities. It's really where the members get the most engaged. And like you said, there's the local section that usually has a lot of camaraderie and a lot of that networking capability. And then there's also the technical communities, which is more of the subject-based type of learnings, which I know you're a member of too, from the Six Sigma Forum and Lean Enterprise Division. So yeah, there's a great networking capability on the ASQ side, and actually within the ASQE side, we work very closely with those technical communities as well. And there's actually on our board, because there are two separate boards, there's the ASQ board and then there's the ASQE board of directors. We actually have the past chair of ASQ on our board, so that's a permanent spot in the ASQE board to ensure there's connectivity. But we also have a position on our board called the TCC liaison, and that is usually an ASQ senior member, someone who's been around ASQ for many years, and they provide that conduit to connect back to the technical communities and make sure that because of the research and the things that we host as ASQE, which we'll talk about, I rely heavily on subject matter experts such as you to help bring a lot of this research to life, because it's you can give the color and the flavor and the real world examples of what our research is showing, because it's basically we can show all the data we want, but we want to hear from you, the practitioners in the field. What does this mean? And how can an organization here, especially because where our goal is to advance the industry of quality, and being that our organizational members need to understand the pulse of where quality is moving, especially, you know, they'll hear it from their employees, obviously, if employees have challenges or things that they need to address, but it's always helpful to have a subject matter expert lens on our research too, and being able to describe some of the things that maybe as a researching team that we aren't seeing because we're not in the field doing the work.
Okay.
Yeah. And so part of your question was, how did I wind up here?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a very multifaceted background. So my original undergrad was in marketing. I got that in '99. And I started out actually in publishing. I worked in print production and digital, or I'm sorry, not digital yet, direct marketing. Back in the day, I was actually with a subsidiary of the Tribune companies out of Chicago, but it was in the Milwaukee area. So I'm from Wisconsin. I'm from southeastern Wisconsin, and spent many years in the publishing community. And it was interesting because that was during like the early aughts into about 2008 or so. And during that time, I actually got laid off 3 times. It was just companies were pretty volatile back then. The printing industry was going through a lot of change. There was this thing emerging called the internet that a lot of people didn't understand how it would shape media in general and how people consumed information. And I decided through that journey, I had gone back to school. I got another undergrad in business administration and decided to change my career, and I went into digital pretty heavily. I actually got into e-commerce and went back. I had retail experience, you know, kind of in high school working part-time, and decided to join a mass retailer that's headquartered here in Wisconsin. It's Kohl's Department Stores. And I was with them for 6 years. And it was during that time that I really found people who understood process management. I mean, I had that in printing to some degree, but printing's pretty cut and dry. It's, you know, there's usually the orders come in and you process the order, and out, you know, out the door the whatever the publication or the print media goes. But in retail, it's so dynamic. And in retail, you really fight for every dollar. You're studying your customer, you are competitive shopping, you are building a better experience, building a better mousetrap essentially every day. And you're also paying attention to the metrics and the goals and the KPIs. And that's where I would say I probably got the most heavy into what I understood then was quality. So it was a lot of terminology that when I eventually then came over to ASQ, I was recruited to come over to ASQ in 2018 and to lead up a couple of programs that were there. And it was interesting because I had heard snippets of quality terms throughout the years, but it was when I actually landed at ASQ was when I started putting it all together and realizing that this is actually, it's a true robust skill set, right? It's an industry unto itself. And then you start realizing all the ways in which quality affects your life, you know, and I don't have a technical background necessarily. Again, my undergrad degrees are in marketing and business admin, but I knew, especially through the marketing piece, of how communication is critical to making sure that people understand what they're doing and how to do it better. And that's where I often saw challenges emerge in the companies that I worked with, where we knew we needed to do better, but it was also very difficult sometimes for very technically oriented people to communicate that to people who aren't technically oriented. So that's what really got me interested in working more in this field and eventually then doing what I do now today for ASQE.
Yeah, and I think that communications is overlooked a lot in improvement work, because it's like, well, we'll just, you know, we'll look at the data, we'll do the time studies, we'll figure out what to do, and then magically everyone's going to be on board with this and understand what we're doing, and it's going to make sense, and they're going to be excited about it, connect the dots. And then you realize, no, that's not what happens. Usually it's confusion and it's not clear and doesn't make sense. And why are we doing this? And that's not, you know, the change management piece of that is left out, and a lot of that is that communications is not clear or being done often or frequently enough, or getting the right feedback to see how are people understanding this or embracing this.
Exactly, yeah. And it was funny because coming up in the printing industry, I would see waste, obviously we'd have scrap, we would have rework a lot, like if something got printed wrong or someone gave us an incorrect spec or something. And it, especially kind of growing up in the Midwest, sustainability wasn't talked about much in those terms, right? And then in retail, clearly sustainability is huge, but in retail, you're always looking to sell more because that's the point of retail. So a lot of times when we would talk about waste, it would be if there was a product recall, if there was unfortunately a shipment went missing, or let's say, because a lot of our things were imported from other countries, it was like, honestly, like if a shipping container went overboard or something got lost. So it was interesting because it wasn't until I came out of retail actually that I got interested more in the sustainability piece. And in my personal life, I've been a sailor for 15 years. I sail on Lake Michigan and race. And it was through that network of people that sustainability really came on my radar. It was through friends of mine who I'd been racing with for years. They were actually part of the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council, and I was invited to tag along and go with them to a couple events. And I was like, oh, it was starting to connect the dots on waste and process, and I'd already known some of those things, but it wasn't really presented to me in a holistic way until really becoming in touch with the council. And so when I got into ASQ, and I already kind of had some experience with the council, but when I got into ASQ, learning more about lean, learning more about the processes and waste, and like wanting to make sure that like things are being optimally used, that's when I decided to go back and I got my master's degree. And I finished that in May of 2023, so last year, from the University of Wisconsin Superior. There's actually like a really great online program through the University of Wisconsin system, and so my degree is in sustainable management from that. And it was funny because taking that program on and becoming a sustainable professional, my textbooks would have Deming reference, they would have Duran reference, like the gurus of quality, like their bedrock foundational methodologies were embedded into the sustainable practices. And so, I'd be studying at night after working, during the day with ASQ and ASQE, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is all connected.
Yeah.
And then, finding people such as you on my ASQ, and I was like, that they get it, like that these are the people that understand it, and you're seeing it from a lens that I think is exciting because, we know that the quality profession has changed so much, especially in the last 20 years. I think with the advent of technology and the way that things have just suddenly exploded, people don't necessarily say that they're doing or practicing quality anymore. It's like, oh, I use this methodology or I do this. And I kind of saw that too when I was hanging out with more sustainability people. It's like, oh no, we do sustainability. And I'm like, yeah, but you're also using quality practices. And they're like, yeah, but I'm practicing sustainability. And then the same thing with quality professionals. I was just at the World Conference on Quality and Improvement in San Diego, and there are quality professionals doing sustainable work, but they don't call it sustainability, right? They call it, and so to me, that's been probably one of the most interesting crossovers that's become more apparent to me, is that many quality professionals and many sustainability professionals are doing very similar work. They just talk about it in different ways. So that is what's inspiring me to try to make sure that our team, when we publish our thought leadership and our the research that we do and conduct, that we are trying to make those direct connections. Because I think this is an exciting time if for a quality professional that they could actually get into sustainability very easily. If they just understand a little bit different terminology, because that's essentially what it's kind of coming down to, is different standards, different regulations, different terminology, but it's very much at the heart the same work.
That's good to hear that that was part of the training. Tying it back to.
Yeah, the plan, do, check, act cycle was referenced, and I was like, I know this.
Cool.
Yeah.
I had one of the clients I worked with was actually taking clothing that was not sold or returned by a brand, and they didn't want to deal with it. It was just the labor It's just something they did not want to deal with. So they would take, these big containers full of return clothes and repair them, inspect them, repair them, fix them, and figure out what's wrong. Why did they return it? Sometimes nothing was wrong, didn't fit. Other times there was scratches or rips or tears or missing buttons and stuff, and they fix them and then resell them at a discount, but still they could make money because it was just something that some of the brands didn't want to deal with. And so when you're talking about the waste there of, something major happening, I've seen that other side of just the customer returns or things didn't sell. And I know there's outlets for what you do and you can't sell it, you discount it, clearance, and then maybe get donated or sent out somewhere. But that's an interesting circular economy has been a little untapped, I think, and people are trying to figure out what do we do to get rid of all this usable clothing that somehow is overproduced and not really a good home for it. To be able to kind of see that there's some work being done there, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in that industry.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, a company like Kohl's, they did a great job in their physical footprint in many ways. So they operate in the 48, continental states, and a lot of their facilities are LEED certified. So they are doing some great things when it comes to their environmental footprint. But yeah, to your point, the circularity piece, I think it's the and then piece that I feel like is missing, right? So it's the I'm working with our team internally to say, because ASQ we have the certifications under us from an operational standpoint, but they're branded ASQ. So the certifications, the team that runs the certs are actually on the ASQE side. And we're taking a hard look at the body of knowledge for those certs. And I keep saying to them, there's a lot of opportunity here to make sure that sustainability, circularity, things that have a natural fit within the quality processes that already exist. Like if you're an auditor, auditing is huge in sustainability, right? Like you're looking for the areas to improve, you're looking for the gaps. And a lot of the sustainability reporting, as like GRI and, the SASB and all the things like that, like it depends on good quality auditors. So when we think about I'm especially, like I said, excited about the career trajectory for our quality professional if they're passionate about sustainability. And we use the environmental social governance acronym in the things that we publish, because that is how organizations are being rated. So but it's also nice because if you're passionate about the environmental, the social, or the governance part, or all three, they all depend very much on a solid quality foundation of understanding, especially that analyzing a process, the waste piece of it, like you said, it's like all this unused stuff could go to better use, or maybe just doesn't get produced in the first place. Because that's the other thing too I saw in retail is that so many buyers are coached over the years to, you're always trying to hit your target, you're always trying to hit your number, but very rarely are you being taught, think about this, like do we really need this amount of product up front? Could we phase it? Is there something about pre-order that we can do? And clearly technology has come along so far. I mean, I kind of laugh of where I look at where I came from, and I was on the team that we built our first mobile app for Kohl's, and it was really just a scrape of the homepage, right? Now you think about apps doing so many more cool things, and they have digital wallets embedded in them, and it's, that was 10 years ago, or actually 15 years ago when we were building the first one. So, and then I think about, I was on the team that created buy online, pick up in store, and I remember some of the managers were skeptical, like, is that really going to take off? And then I think about the COVID years and how that helped so many people get the goods that they needed, right? Buy online, pick it up in store. And so it's just been really fascinating to see how ideas that are started years ago and, just that little shift in mindset can make a huge impact years later, when you might not expect it to. So that was it was fun coming up in those different types of career journeys and coming out the other side of it and now reflecting back on it.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something as well that, they're kind of looking at the building infrastructure first, and they're looking at LEED certification and maybe energy reduction. But it's like the next level of maturity is really getting into the products and services, saying, what are we doing about the things we actually sell? And I think I see that as general natural progression that companies go through. They're hesitant to touch the products and services. Now you're dealing with the customers, and this is working. Let's not ruffle things too much right now. Let's do everything else besides that. But they have to get to that at some point to say, how are we producing or designing and manufacturing and supporting these products and services? And that's really the heart of it. And that's what makes the company do sustainability and versus becoming sustainable, is the customers see it in the products and services. Because we don't really see their buildings, we don't get to tour their sites, we don't work there, right? And so the employees might see some of that activity happening, but the consumers don't until it hits the products and service. But I think it is something they don't jump right into. It's like, let's do all the other stuff first. Let's do the reporting. Let's lower our footprint. Then we're maybe start talking about the products and talk to our customers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been, and I think I still in many ways have retail brain, because I am always comp shopping, where I'm always looking at new emerging brands that are doing things differently. And there's a couple of very cool, I would say, gritty, scrappy startups that have happened with brands that have been now become like cult favorites, right? So you think about like, if you've heard of Rothy's shoes, like they're made of recycled water bottles and they're 3D printed, and they have a cult following, and I own several pairs of them, but they've almost created these buy, sell, trade under market of Facebook groups where people are like literally in search of a certain pattern, because some of the patterns are also limited edition, and but the shoes are fully recyclable. And you think about the footprint of that. It's those types of innovators and entrepreneurs that I think are really fascinating to watch, because they give you the traceability of the entire product, and they're still operating within a retail mindset. Like they're still the e-commerce, they're building their sites. They've got now a couple physical stores in some major cities, but the product all along has been sustainably sourced and made. And what they do really well, kind of to your point, they talk about it. Like they tell the consumer, this is why we're doing this. And I think it's fascinating because they have metrics they can show. They have their sustainability reporting. Nisolo is another one. They're another shoe company that is sustainably sourced. And actually, when you buy a pair of Nisolos, they have almost like a nutrition label that comes with your shoes, and it tells you the traceability of the material, where it came from, who made your shoe, or who was part of the QC process. So it's really cool. Like we're seeing, and this is the kind of thing that I look at, because I look at the industry shifts and I look at like who's doing what. There are some companies out there that are just really changing, I think, the game when it comes to how you communicate with your customer. How do you create value? Like how do you, retail, especially if we look at that as an industry, it's so noisy. I mean, anybody can sell something, right? But how do you stand out from the crowd, and how do you also do good at the same time? So in my spare time, like I'm very active with the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council, and then I'm also a vice chair. I'm on the board of Be Local Wisconsin, and Be Local Wisconsin is the state level of the B Lab B Corp movement. So B Lab US and Canada we report up into, but B Corp certification is huge, and it's very stringent. It's quite difficult to obtain. Some of the best known are Patagonia or Allbirds shoes, and a lot of them actually are like retail and coffee and food companies. But what's fascinating is that their whole mission is not about like you're in it to make money, but you're using your business for good, and that's literally the tagline of the B Corp movement is using business for good. And I think that that's a really fascinating study, because I can tell you when I got my undergrad in business admin in 2007, like that was not part of the curriculum. Like we weren't talking about positive impact from a business operation. And I'm happy to see that has now taken off. There's over 8,000 B Corps in the world. And I think that more is happening. And it's exciting to see a lot of these core foundational concepts kind of coming full circle and starting to be looked at from more of a or not even a philanthropic, but more of that human centric, or more of that, like, are we doing this for the right reason type of mindset.
Yeah, I actually went through that B Corporation certification for my small consulting business, and I did get certified, but I
Nice.
was not able to maintain it because their criteria got more difficult. And it's just like I don't have the ability to keep up with with this at my level, and I'm still following all the principles of it, but you noticed on the second, when I tried to recertify to it, it was like, whoa, this is stepped up again, which is good. But maybe they need a different level for, individual small practices like that, but that's fine. It's intended for a larger or, sizable groups with employees and have a significant impact, so
Yeah.
that it's good for those organizations for sure. And but I definitely think it's a great way to separate out yourself and say, this is something important to me as an organization. This is my, I want to do this right. I want to have a minimal footprint. I want to be a good steward in the community. I want to not have any difficulties from a social perspective. Governance is strong. I want to do all the right things ethically and show that I'm doing that. And there's a lot of details and the evidence that they require. It's upload this, show us this document, give us a spreadsheet. It's not just, yes, I did this, no, it's not a questionnaire. They are very thorough about that. And so as difficult as it is, you feel good about that. It's not something you can easily achieve. It takes some work to get there.
Yeah, and I think, for anyone who's in quality listening, like the Malcolm Baldrige Award is very, like the criteria there is very similar, right? It usually takes, I think on average, about 3 years for a company to even achieve Baldrige, like level type of performance. The B Corp cert is very similar to that. And the difference there is that B Corp, and I'm sure you can attest to this, right? It really is challenging you to rethink a lot of your practices, right? Or like, especially like your energy consumption, your ethical practices, that kind of thing. And it's not meant to replace Baldrige in any way, but it's kind of like that level of performance evaluation. And there's a kind of a fun fact too around the B Corp is certifications is that while there's only 8,000 right now in the world globally, there's actually like over 2,000 here in the US. About 400,000 companies use the B Corp assessment to rate their performance internally. So it's not that maybe they will chase a certification, like maybe they will pursue it, but I mean, a huge amount of them use it to just get to better. And I think that's kind of the main point, right? It's that we're thinking about your processes, thinking about your mission, your values, like why you're in business, how you're treating your stakeholders and your customers. That's really where I think these types of, the ESG mindset or the sustainability mindset can really help, because there are tangible things that come of it. And a lot of times I think it gets slammed with, oh, it's too expensive, or oh, it's this or that. And it's like, no, actually, like if you're already following some compliance things anyway, or like, you're already trying to be within the compliance of your industry regulations and standards, you're already practicing quality management system, that type of thing. This should dovetail pretty nicely into that. It's just changing the mindset. And it kind of comes back to that culture aspect that we were talking about, right? It's like, if change management is used effectively, you will get your employees on board. And I think the other thing too, we're seeing obviously is like the generational shifts are occurring, and we're seeing younger people come into the job market. They want to work for companies that are practicing these behaviors, and that's a talent retention and recruitment tool. So I would say, like, if a company is not yet on board, get on board because you're going to have a really hard time finding talent and keeping talent if you're not looking at these ways to help improve your overall operation.
Yeah, and I look for the label. I see a B Corp label on a product, and that makes me stop and pause and look at it and say, "Oh, I'm that's going to weigh on my decision making on purchase." And if there's clients I run across that I want to work with those clients, because I know like we're going to be aligned on what we're trying to do. And if I'm trying to make improvements, and I suggest this is good for sustainability, I know that that's going to get weighted heavier than another organization that might just look at it from pure cost and say, well, we don't have the money or time to do that. And what I found was, I had goals around, energy and usage, cutting that down, but it made me kind of quantify that and set a goal. And then it also opened up ways for me to think about my vendors and people I work with as contractors and my customers and saying, who am I working with? Do I have diversity in those groups? And I hadn't thought about that at all. And I started to kind of think about that, say, how do I better serve a wider range of people and a wider community, a more diverse community of people? And I think that was really eye-opening to me. And so, yeah, I think it's, if you already have the good structure in place, it should just be add on to that already and fits in nicely. But if you don't have that, it'll kind of help you force you to get some alignment and structure there, so that you connect the dots and set different metrics or goals that you maybe are not tracking as well or looking at, but are important to your business, whether for employee retention or attraction or for customers, attracting customers. Yeah, so I think that's some kind of structure like that, whether it's Baldrige or B Corporation, I think can be really helpful to businesses.
Well, and people can even do that with the ISOs. You know, you think about how many different ISO standards there are. There's like the 14,000 series, which is about the environmental piece, but then there's also the 26,000 series, which is social responsibility. So you can stack these like Legos in a way, and like, given the amount of tools out there, that there's ways to like help make your company operate better, more sustainably. It's just, there's no right way to get there. It really depends too on your industry. And, you know, I would say, you know, a lot of times people, especially when I went into my master's program, I was one of the very few people that did not come in with a science background. I was in classes with a lot of biologists, you know, geologists, water scientists. I was in some ways the lone marketing or business person, like, you know, hey, I can, you know, but the thing that I understood was how to boil very complex information down so that a leader, especially like a C-suite level, would get behind it and champion the initiative. Because if you don't have leader support in this, a lot of this stuff won't get done, right? And you know, I think there's been great examples of teams that have done more of a grassroots effort where it's like the employees are passionate about something, and they you know, hopefully they're empowered in a way that they can help identify risk, especially like because if you're, you know, if you think about, a lot of sustainability is really risk management. It's risk, you know, identification and management. And that's something that we talk about a lot in our thought leadership that we publish, is that, you know, leaders have to really show that they are allowing their employees to embrace these types of things, and then bring it forward to them of how do they get there, right? Because if a leader's sold on the idea, and a leader can see like the ROI on this, or like why it's important to the business, or why it helps with customer loyalty, like you were saying, you look for these types of practices in your products that you choose. That's usually what we see end up moving the needle. And then a leader, that it clicks, right? Like they decide to get behind it and then make an initiative out of it and weave it into their strategies. So that's the nice thing that I think, especially in the last 4 years that we've been doing the research that we've been doing, that's where we've been seeing the most movement, and it's great.
Time check, how you doing?
Good.
If we go a little longer, is that okay?
Yeah,
Do you
that's fine.
hard stop at 11? Okay, second. All right, having a great conversation, and I'm like, oh, we haven't even gotten into meetings.
No worries.
Which is good. That's a good thing. So I think that's a good tie in there. Can you talk about some of the work with, I want to get the acronym right, the IOE, but the Insights on Excellence?
Yeah.
All right. So can you share a little bit about what ASQE is doing and what your role is with that, and just discuss some of the reports and some of the findings so far and what things are coming up?
Yeah, IOE, so Insights on Excellence, and you're right about that. The acronym is IOE. It's really our flagship product. It's the thing that our organizational members, so the companies themselves, have access to. So this is one of the main benefits of being an ASQE org member, is that we have an online benchmarking tool that you log into. It's through your already your established membership login, and we have benchmarking season that starts every early Q, like Marchish, I would say, is like when benchmarking season opens up, and it concludes in August. And during that time, companies can get a team together of their employees, and they go in and they take about a 35-minute survey. It's all online. And what it does is that it measures performance against 9 different categories. So 8 are scored, and the 9th one right now is environmental social governance. It's ESG. ESG. The reason it's not scored just yet is that we're still collecting a lot. We want to have a good data set behind it in order to give benchmarks, but the other 8 are scored. And we're in our 4th year now of doing this. And I was actually on the ground floor of developing the tool. So again, I come from a digital background. So I was helping to architect the tool itself and creating the survey. And the bright spot here of this is another way that the 2 associations work together is that all of the question sets throughout all 9 of the categories. So that includes operations, workforce, strategy, leadership, measurement and results, barriers and disruptors, voice of customer, ESG. All of those were developed with ASQ subject matter experts. So through the technical communities, I'm really proud to say to date, we've worked with over 45 subject matter experts. So this has been a very robust partnership. And what the tool can offer you is that when you come out the other side of taking the survey, so if you're one of the team members of these org member companies, when you get to the final dashboard, essentially, you get your full results, and it'll give you in real time global benchmark scores against the other companies and organizations that have taken the survey. So for example, we'll think of like operations. There's 4 levels of maturity, and basically 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest, and it'll rate you how you answered the questions versus what the global benchmark score is. And then we publish those results as part of our research publications that we've been doing every year. So we offer the most comprehensive report that we offer is called the Benchmarking Highlights Report. We used to call it the category report because it would talk about all 9 of the categories, but we changed the name this last year, and these are free. They're all on insightsonexcellence.org, and basically the Benchmarking Highlights Report gives a snapshot of every single category and what are the main trends we're seeing, where things have changed. I mean, it was kind of just coincidental. We didn't plan it this way, but the first year that we did our research was 2020 and COVID was happening. And to then do the next round of research for 2021, the amount of change that we saw occur within the categories of measuring these different types of facets of operational practices, it was pretty amazing. We saw, obviously, people were really struggling with supply chain issues, which everyone was in 2020 and 2021, right? So a lot of things that were making the news, we saw transpire in the data, right? We could make direct connections with that. And then I would say probably the bright spot of my job is that when we write and publish these reports, we then talk with subject matter experts, and we're doing webinars to go deep on the research, right? So, this whole first half of 2024, we've been focused a lot on supply chain because supply chains are still a huge part of sustainability, especially greenhouse gas tracking and reduction. And so I had the pleasure of working with 3 subject matter experts from the ASQ technical communities. That was Dr. Nick Vyas, Marcel Minatolo, and Russ Snyder, and they're all supply chain experts. And so we dug deep. They contributed to our IOE focus study on supply chain sustainability, and then they did a webinar with me, and then they were also at our Excellence Roundtable at WCQI talking about these things. And what's great about it is that you can see obviously the data results, and you can see how important that type of topic is ranking for an organization to be better in their operations. But what's fascinating is when you see the gap between how leaders rank it versus quality professionals. So in our data set, we actually ask what role you play in the company, and we are equally surveying leaders and the quality professionals. So we want the boots on the ground mentality, and we also want the leader or the C-suite mentality. And a lot of times that's where we're seeing the most statistically significant variances, is because we clearly know, like, a leader many times wants to keep up appearances because there's other pressures on them as far as shareholders or stock price, things like that. But then when you get into the weeds with the people that are on the front lines doing the job, they clearly a lot of times have a different opinion on how the same category is being ranked. So that's been the most fascinating piece of this. And the nice thing, I think, for our org members, really where they find the most value, is that when they get their team together, we give them what's called an elaboration report. And this is something exclusive to them. This is actually generated by our team, but it gives them, and we anonymize the data. So it's not like they can be like, hey, Tom, why did you rate us this way, right? So it's basically saying, like, okay, if you had a team of 10 participants participate for your company, here's the 10 here's how everything aggregated together, right? And what it's really meant to do is give them fuel to have productive conversations. Because if you think about it, if you're not addressing the problems, you're not having those honest conversations, you'll never improve, right? Like, so that's where we really try to empower our members, is to have the tools and give them a way to have a way to survey and get real feedback, that in a way that maybe they're never using in their own internal environment, right? So companies have their own engagement surveys and ways that they collect, data of how things are going. But this is a little bit different because it'll show you, are you above the benchmark? Are you below the benchmark? Are you right on track? And we also help identify areas of prioritization to improve. So the tool's very robust. I'm actually really proud of how it's come together over the years. This is our 4th year of collecting data. We're actually, benchmarking season is open. So if you are an ASQE org member right now listening, you actually can participate. And it closes in August. And then that's when our research cycle closes, and we go into the next round of publishing research with the fresh data. So that's a little kind of a combo question or combo answer, but that's how we generate the different types of reports and research that we do.
Okay,
And a little bit about the tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then, so the benchmarking, like, we do the larger, big, comprehensive reports, but then we also do the very narrow topic focused types of studies as well, that we go deep, and then we ask subject matter experts such as you to help weigh in and give your real world opinion on what the data is showing.
And so from a sustainability standpoint, what are some of those reports? What's already been done and what's coming down the line?
Yeah, so in the benchmarking highlights report, because ESG is one of the main categories, there's a whole section on just ESG and sustainability. And we've been actually talking about ESG, or sustainability and quality, since 2022 is when we actually introduced it. And I was really pushing hard on it, not only because I was getting my master's, but because I saw so much overlapping connection between the two. And luckily, our leadership team embraced it, and they're like, go ahead and go into it. And it was really wonderful to see actually the amount of, especially through the technical communities, it was really wonderful to see the amount of ASQ members out there that actually are already doing this work. So, you're one of those people. Beth Cudney is another person. Lisa Greenwood, Willie Vandebrandy has been doing this for years. He's very well known in ASQ circles, and actually he's in Europe. And so he's become a good friend of ours, and he's weighed in on tons of our stuff as well. And so it was very validating for me to find that there were professionals willing to come forward and contribute, because we feel very strongly about the topic, especially from the fact that the members that we have, many of them are publicly traded companies. They've already been rated on ESG, their investor ratings, through the Dow and through the S&P 500 and things like that. They're already getting scored on this, and they have been for years. So when you talk about, the economic impact, or you think about the return on investment, like, this is stuff that has been happening. And so we really wanted to make sure that any research or any types of reports we were publishing were meeting the modern business needs for the customers as well. Because it's one thing if you have an employee come in, maybe they're fresh out of college, they've got their engineering degree, they want to know how they can grow too, right? And so it's like, if a company is doing the right thing by looking forward and saying, okay, we don't have this yet, but here's some people who have just come in, as the organization, like I said, the younger generations want to be doing this type of work. That's a way to help motivate and keep and retain talent and make sure that they are going in that direction. So that's why we're publishing these types of studies too, is because we want to make sure that the keywords are relevant to things that they may be searching for, or especially a lot of legislation just got passed last year. There was the new California law about, emissions that got passed in October. This is going to impact them, right? These companies, if they're doing business in California, which most businesses are, just based on the sheer size of California, we want to make sure that the reports are speaking to what professionals need and what the organizations need. And if not, that's what we want to hear too, right? That's why we have the webinars and the types of the roundtable events that we do, because we want to hear from our members, like, what do you guys need, right? Like, what do you need to succeed in your role, and how can this data help you do that? Because a lot of times it's tools that they can then use to have conversations with their leadership to help move that needle, right? Like, it's okay if they're not doing it today necessarily, but it's like, how do you get down that path? How do you get started to start doing those things? So that's why we publish the variety of reports that we do.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want to share any takeaways or findings so far that you found?
Why don't we do that? Yeah, I'll share my screen, and this will be a way to kind of illustrate that a little bit of what I was just speaking about. So in this example, we asked the question. So this is actually a question directly from the survey itself. So when you come into the IOE benchmarking tool, you complete each section. It's very user intuitive. It's very easy to get through. But one of the questions we pose is, to what extent do you agree with the following statements regarding your organization's compliance with ESG regulations and standards? Now, granted, there's so many different standards and regulations out there for ESG, but it's really thinking about your own industry, your own organization. And when we pose a question like this, we usually have a Likert scale, and we're asking, them to agree or disagree, and to what extent they agree or disagree. And this is actually the results that you see right now on screen are actually pretty typical in the last several years, that the disagrees right now are outweighing the agrees. And I would say this probably isn't very shocking when we think about the state of things. Obviously, the EU, Europe has been much more far along than the US in this regard. But when we think about the amount of new regulations and standards that have just come out, this is going to grow in importance, right? So if you're in the disagree bucket, it's time to change. It's time to start embracing this and understanding, kind of like what we were chatting about before, like how can you use a standard or a framework to start getting you down that path. And I think, obviously being part of the Sustainable Business Council, about 50% of the people that come to that conference are new to sustainability. So there's an appetite out there, like people want to get involved. I think there's a little bit of that intimidation factor though, where they don't know how to get involved. And I would say probably one of the easiest things, and this is something we talk about, is just start looking at the regulation itself or looking at the standard. And if you think about it more in like what you're already doing, like we were talking about before, and if you already have people who are trained in quality, those are people that actually could probably adapt pretty quickly into understanding this, because they understand compliance, they understand measurement, they understand waste, especially if they're in lean, if they're using lean. And so I think the intimidation factor is larger than the actual reality. And so a lot of times when we do workshops, or even when we've had the ASQE webinars that we've conducted, it's always wonderful to hear the comments come back, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I didn't realize that this was so interconnected, or this doesn't seem that bad. that the mindset shifts or the attitude shifts. And that's what we're hoping to show with this, and have discussions like with people like you, because I think it's just more of some of the terminology is confusing, and I would argue some of the quality terminology is confusing, because there's a whole jargon and there's acronyms and all of that thrown in. But when you start narrowing it down to like, what do you actually need to succeed in your industry and your organizational operations, a lot of this is very akin to quality that's already the foundational quality practices that are already been used. It's just changing that mindset to think about the what's next, or the and then part. Kind of going back to that whole retail example, right? Like you have all this stuff you're overproducing. Do you really need to produce that much? Or just changing the mindset of like, yeah, we've been doing it this way for years and years and years. Do we still have to, or what can we change? So this is the type of data that we're publishing, but then this is also the type of data that we then have our roundtable discussions based on. And we really challenge people just to think differently.
Yeah, and I think helping organizations realize that if you try to set up a separate system or program, just like having a separate quality program or a separate environmental program, that doesn't work. Like it has to be connected into your existing program of however you run your organization or business. Like it has to be a piece inserted in. You can't have, well, then for this part, we have our own metrics and processes, and it doesn't work like that. It's got to be integrated. And so it shouldn't be that much more work, and it shouldn't change how people approach it. It's just a different metric, perhaps, and a different background knowledge they might have to gain. I know I've reached out to get some more sustainability training because I didn't feel confident in my knowledge around some of those topics. So I did a similar thing. I went back to school to get some a certificate program. Uh, Probably didn't have to do that, but it made me more confident that I understood more of the terms and concepts a little bit. But getting back into the corporate world and seeing like this is just another metric, whether it's a technical measurement of a product or it's the waste going down the drain, it's a number, and I know how to deal with numbers. And I think some of that can make it less scary for people to realize, all right, the how you solve it and why is a little different, but you're going through the same process. It's an audit, it's a data analysis, it's having infrastructure in your process, it's communication, training, all those things are still needed. And that should be very familiar to everybody. So hopefully it's not as scary as it might seem.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, I would argue, and I'm sure you've heard this too, you know, being in the ASQ circles for years, we hear the mantra of quality is everyone's job, right? I would argue that it's now sustainability is everyone's job, and quality is embedded in sustainability. So if you're doing both, you will become more sustainable, right? Like it's kind of that mindset shift. And that's where I talk about the fact of like, you know, leaders really definitely need to embrace this, because if you are practicing sustainability and doing it earnestly, you are incorporating quality, you're incorporating compliance, you're incorporating all the things that are good that will lower risk for your company, lower costs. You know, it's like thinking the long game rather than just the short game. So yeah,
I think
so everything
the
you said, I totally
customers,
agree.
yeah, and I think the customers have driven this too, like uh, by them saying, I want products or services that people care about and they've thought through and they've tried to minimize their impact. And I'm going to put my money towards that. That I think that helps sell that this is the requirements from the customer, right? And that's what we've been going off of for years that did not include sustainability or ESG very much. That wasn't important at the time. And now that shift is starting to happen where people are asking those questions saying, where did you get and source that raw material? How are you treating the people that you're interacting with and your vendors and suppliers? What impacts are you having? Am I contributing by purchasing your products and services to that problem? And I don't want to. That has helped drive that as a requirement now instead of just a nice to have or something that wasn't even considered 20 years ago, 30 years ago, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other bright spot here is that the organizations that have embraced that, their stock, like you look at the indices, how they're being measured, the stocks are more stable. They don't suffer the hard, you know, peaks and valleys that other stocks do. Just the companies themselves, I think, they're just more battle proof in a way. like they can weather these things. They can stand behind their products, they can stand behind their product claims. That's where this really translates into. And I think that a lot of times leaders, obviously they're trying to make a short-term decision because they've got so many pressures. But if you're able to think about your culture, and it's like if you're making 3-5 year strategic plans, then sustainability should really be a part of that, because that is what sustainability is meant to do. It's meant to give you that long game. It's meant to give you that long-term mindset, and just as quality is. So it's yeah, it's basically two sides of the same coin in many ways. So yeah, and then you know, another example that we can share is kind of that same thing where we're talking about, you know, the question of when we asked, you know, basically a similar question, but really the one selection that came forward was, yes, do I agree or do I disagree if my organization fosters internal compliance with ESG regulations and standards through a robust quality management system, right? So now we're talking about the fact of like, have they integrated sustainability practices within their existing QMS, right? So this is where we're really talking about a maturity type of level of performance. And we're seeing actually an uptake in the agree, which is great, you know, overall. But we see from 2022 to 2023, there was a slight dip, but we still see a high percentage of disagree. And this is where, you know, when I was talking a little bit before about those org members that get their elaboration report at the end of benchmarking season and they can see how their team scored. This would be a perfect type of question to have an internal discussion on at your company, right? Because, you know, most companies, especially if you're publicly traded, you probably have a sustainability statement, if not a plan, or you have, things that are publicly facing that say, yes, we're doing these things. But if your employees are coming back and they're showing this level of disagreement, this is where I think that, again, coming back to having those honest conversations really helps, because there might be something that maybe leaders are overlooking that they didn't realize needs attention, or maybe there's great ideas that just haven't been given time to discuss, to start implementing. And in all fairness, like, we know sustainability is moving very quickly, right? The concepts of sustainability, like the amount of regulations, the amount of things that are coming forward, it's fast paced and it's moving quickly. I totally empathize with that. So it's difficult for a lot of leaders, I think, to navigate this stuff. But when they take a hard look and I think they're willing to address the fact that if there is that range of agree versus disagree, and when they take a look at their own team's reporting coming out of benchmarking season, this is the type of stuff that can help them get to better, right? It's empowering employees rather than, not giving them that space to thrive and to have those conversations. And that goes back again to even some of the things that B Corp talks about, right? Like, B Corp is very heavy on employee empowerment. A lot of these sustainability standards talk about corporate culture. So if you are an organization and you want to improve your corporate culture, take a look at these sustainability standards, because a lot of them speak to doing just that. And I think it's been a pleasant surprise for a lot of the leaders that have come into this. And maybe they've come, out of 20 years of doing something else, or 30 years of doing, a different type of operation. But then when they start looking at these, they're like, oh, this doesn't, this actually seems like something I'm trying to achieve right now. And this gives you a little bit more of a framework to have those types of conversations and move in that direction. It won't happen overnight, right? But it's going back to that communication and that mindset change that we were discussing earlier.
Great. Did you have some other ones you want to go through?
Yeah, why don't we, let's see here. I can either talk about the trade part or the environmental part. Do you have an economic or environmental preference, or anything you want to add on either?
Let's see. I mean, I would lean towards the environment, but I think maybe the economic might be interesting, just because that might be a good tie-in for people that want to see that connection. So let's talk about economic.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then, kind of tying off of what we were just speaking about, that we did ask the question in the ESG section of the IOE benchmarking tool. We do go in more depth to economic and environmental and types, like more specific, like topic specific types of questions. And in this particular data set, what we pulled forward, there is a question where the participants in the tool are asked to rank which of their economic concerns are of most importance to their organization's ESG efforts, and they can select up to 3. The ones that we saw trickle up to the top, there's actually a pretty lengthy list in the tool that they can pick from, but we obviously see trade policies and regulations and infrastructure costs and maintenance definitely dominating the pack. This is not surprising given a lot of the different types of regulations and standards that have come forward in the last several years. And when we think about it, trade policies in particular and regulations, this goes back to what I was talking about before about, California having passed some laws. And then also if you are an organization that does business within the EU, this especially affects you, right? Because those policies are changing very quickly and becoming quite mature, which is great to see. But that then also means that you're going to have corresponding costs in order to comply probably with these different types of standards and regulations. So we're not necessarily surprised by these numbers, but this is definitely trending. Like I said, like when there's news that's usually breaking, we see it within the data that comes out the other end within the survey results. So I don't know if you had any other thoughts on this, or if this tracks kind of with what you're seeing on your side of the clients or the work you do.
Yeah, I haven't really seen that much with the tie to the economics. I mean, I think when I try to sell more ESG type of work, there's the employee engagement and the productivity that can come with that. It's the retention of employees. It's the attracting of employees, which is, a challenge right now of finding people who can work and then keeping them, and making it harder for them to want to jump ship to someone else just for more money if they feel like they have a good thing going. And then on the environmental side, looking at energy costs, and that seems to drive a lot of interest in lowering energy costs. But some of the other things are harder to sell. Payback on some investment and some greening of the operations can be a deterrent at times. But I think the business part of the raw materials is definitely something that comes up, and people are looking at ways to lower their costs, and labor costs get talked about too. But that doesn't tie in too much on the ESG. It's kind of like that's part of doing business, and this is what we need. And that's, I think, something that's always been looked at by businesses is trying to manage those costs. But yeah, when I was looking at some of this earlier, I think it made me think a little bit about other opportunities there, like the building footprint. Like how much space do we really need? And I think the last couple of years have really challenged people about office space, and do we need people here all the time? And what do we really need to be able to do the job here? And why are we holding this huge building? And why is it storing so much inventory? And some of those other things tie in nicely. And that's why I've always been promoting this idea that you take care of the waste in your process, and you're going to have a positive impact on all these areas indirectly, and sometimes directly. We can focus some efforts on ESG and use these tools and see process improvement and process benefits from doing so. So it does connect very nicely. But I think this does open up some other areas where we could talk about the business impact of this. It's not just a good thing to do and what customers want, but this can make your business more robust, resilient, and profitable too.
Absolutely. And I think, the other piece of this, like you touched on the office space use. And for a lot of times, especially in the Sustainable Business Council network that I have, people don't realize that an office building is a footprint. Even though you're not a manufacturer, you're not actually outputting a widget or a product or something, you don't have emissions attached to that. You still have an HVAC system, you still have a building, you still have people commuting to and from. And I think if companies are really going all in on like looking at their carbon footprint, looking at also the corporate culture too, like are happier employees understanding that they have more flexibility for where they work and how they work, right? So all of these things that I think has finally kind of broken through in the last couple of years, as far as like the remote work phenomenon that we were all forced into with COVID, but has stayed because people love it. People like having that flexibility. I think in the next, like my prediction, just because as we study this data, we see these things kind of emerging. All these things are actually within the ESG bucket, right? Like it's all part of the environmental, the social, and the governance pieces. And I think about my own family, and my husband has worked remotely for 10 years. I mean, he's been in digital and software for years, and there's certain industries that are way farther ahead on that than others. But it's been interesting to kind of see the equilibrium kind of start to happen across multiple industries that might have never thought to allow for remote work before. And then, as you said, how does that then translate into their carbon footprint? Because it does. It is all connected, and there is a way to connect the dots. And we kind of think about this too. I'll lightly touch on the environmental initiatives. Again, and when we talked in the survey about asking the survey participants to select their environmental initiatives that are in greatest importance to the organization. Again, the policy and trade piece came up, but also severe weather preparation emerged, and then sustainable supply chains, and that's why we went heavy on the sustainable supply chain topic earlier this spring. But the severe weather preparation, this is a big one that I don't think it's enough discussion when it comes to the infrastructure piece, right? Because that impacts facilities and, like you said, warehouses. And if you have tons of product hanging out in a warehouse and a tornado hits it or a flood hits it or fire, that's lost, that's cost, right? Like that's lost to the company. So these types of things are all interconnected. And I think by talking about these things more and pushing that envelope to make sure that these organizations are really taking these things into consideration, I think helps just overall use of the quality methodologies to kind of process all this information, because it's a lot. It's a lot to digest and work through. But as you mentioned before, it's like there's ways that you can do this in a way that makes it more holistic and make it integrated into what you're already doing. And then at least you're feeling more prepared to be able to address these challenges when and if they should occur. So yeah, this is just just a snapshot of what the IOE tool, the questions that are in it, and then also the types of reporting that we're issuing. So thank you for indulging me. I hope that was interesting, and but that's just a snapshot of what our team does. And I help lead that team. So we have there's 4 of us in ASQE that work hand in hand to publish and to digest all the data and to write it, and then we work with the subject matter experts to bring a lot of this forward for our members so that members can join different conversations based on what they need to know. And also then we're working, like I said, with the certification team to make sure that we are providing information that they can then improve the certifications to best address customer needs.
Yeah, kudos to your team for putting all the reports together and putting that out there. And good to hear about certifications. I think that is an opportunity to embed these into expectations of roles around certified professionals. It's great. And we've got, we can go on a lot longer, I'm sure. So I think we'll call it good for now, but we're going to do another podcast. So you've got a new report coming out, and I've contributed to that as some of the feedback already. And we'll talk about waste and ESG specifically. Do you want to talk about that real quick and what we're planning for the next podcast?
Yeah, thank you. And so Beth Cudney, who's also been a long-term ASQ member, will be contributing to that. And we also have Sandy Ferderer, who's also a long-time ASQ member. Yes. Sandy and Beth actually just did a presentation on lean, waste, and sustainability at WCQI. And so they were also on my radar that I wanted to make sure that we featured their expertise in this, because this is something that they actually do in their practice as well every day. So the next focus study is called Utilizing Lean to Minimize Waste with ESG Initiatives. And we're going to be pulling forward specific questions from the IOE benchmarking tool that specifically talk about lean and also employee understanding of waste reduction. And it all ties in with some of the other ESG data that we'll be showing, similar to the questions that I just talked through. So and the nice thing with all the IOE research is it's meant to stack together, right? So you can use our bigger, more comprehensive reports to give more of that organizational operation look and feel to kind of help your own company get to better. But then if there is a very specific area that you want to focus in on, that's why we bring those focus studies to life, because it'll really go deeper onto a certain track of practice or mindset or methodologies that can be used to help get a company moving along quicker. So I'm really excited and thank you again for contributing to that research piece, because we've got plenty of data and we're sifting through it. We've actually got 2 more than planned for the rest of the year. So insightsonexcellence.org is where you can find all of this, and all of these are free too. So I think that's the other member benefit, is that, being in the ASQ and the ASQE system as far as membership, this is at your fingertips. You guys can download it and use it. And then especially if you're an ASQE org member, the benchmarking tool that's an exclusive benefit, and you're getting custom reports that show your own performance based on those benchmarks. And then you have our team that can help support questions as far as the elaboration report. And we also have worksheets and other types of things that we create that help organizations have these conversations to really just help, form that corporate culture that many of them are seeking to build.
Very cool. So yeah, we'll talk more about this in next podcast with Beth, and yeah, I think that will be great. We can go a little deeper into some more of those topics, but that was really interesting to kind of see the big picture and how all that's kind of evolved, and good to see that ESG is making its way into an important part of companies' radar, and hopefully a lot of people with background on improvement can really find a way to fit themselves in if that's a topic they're interested in. I think the research is showing there's lots of opportunity to go. So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time, Erin. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep.